Hello, everyone. Today is December the 20th, Wednesday. We are on track for Christmas next week. And in this live, we're going to be answering some topics addressed by people who sent us messages either over our YouTube channel or other social media platform. In Brazil, there is an expectation of privacy for clients, of course. So for these questions in particular, I'm not mentioning, this person's names. But if you are participating in our live stream right now, and if you ask a question by entering the question, of course, your username is going to show on our channel, and you know that I'm just explaining the distinction that if you are choosing to disclose your user ID, of course everybody's going to see it. But for whoever sent those questions to our social media, I'm not going to be disclosing the names, okay? But this was a suggestion from a client this week. This client said he likes to listen and to watch our live streams, but he doesn't like the radio silence. The radio silence we have sometimes, and I explained it. If we don't have questions, I'm usually working on something, and he suggested that I could bring some additional content. So for those who like to really, sit down and listen and watch our live streams, they don't need to endure breaks. And I thought, listen, this is a great idea, and we're going to implement that in our next live. So that's what we are doing. This live is going to be roughly for an hour, okay? And so in about 1 hour from now, we're going to end the live stream. But in the meantime, feel free to jump in and let me know any topics you would like to be discussed, okay? So I'm going to start. I'm going to take my cell phone over here, and I'm going to read some of these questions I told you about. So let's start with this one. I've been dating a Brazilian man for 6 months only. Am I in a união estável? Okay. So the question is about união estável. União estável is specifically the way Brazilians refer to, and some foreign citizens as well, to the common law marriage, right? So maybe we're going to start with what a common law marriage means. And a common law marriage means a situation in which there is a couple. This couple has a really solid relationship, but for some reason they don't formally marry. Okay, they don't formally marry, but because of this strong bond, they end up creating a type of marriage, even though there was no marriage ceremony, there was no ceremony paperwork, but from a legal perspective, this couple is going to be found to be in a marriage, right? So the purpose of saying common law marriage, which is like the international term for what we call união estável in Brazil, it means that you end up in a marriage, even though you never signed any papers, right? To make it real simple for you to understand. And common law marriage exists in several countries. So I'm going to talk about a few places for which I am qualified to talk about. In Brazil, there has been união estável from a legal perspective, like spelled out since the Brazilian Constitution from 1988. And união estável or common law marriage has been recognized formally since then. Even prior to the Brazilian Constitution of 1988, there were decisions in which, for instance, like a couple living for 20 years, even though there was no marriage, even though there was no a common law marriage as a legal construct back then, some judges, they would decide in favor of finding a common law marriage to avoid injustice, right? The scenario would be this couple has been together for 20 years, and usually, as you can expect, it would be the wife who would be claiming the common law marriage, and the wife would be working, doing like the household chores, and the husband would be the so-called breadwinner. And after 20 years, they would part ways, and then the husband, right? Not exactly a husband from a formal perspective, but the man, he would say, well, bad, so bad for you because there is no marriage, right? So Brazilian judges would step in and say, you know what, there is no marriage. There is not even like the legal institute of common law marriage in Brazil, but we're still gonna find an existing asset relationship between the parties to avoid injustice. Because in such circumstances, like during a 20-year period of time, usually the woman would start in this relationship when she was in her 20s or 30s. And then when they are parting ways, the woman would be like in her 50s, right? And back then, it's not like today that there was still a market for this woman. And then the judges would try to kind of give this person some, rights so she wouldn't be, totally deprived. That was the concept. But then in 1988, there was the new Brazilian Constitution. The new Brazilian Constitution would specifically mention that a common law marriage was recognized, right? And since then, the common law marriage in Brazil has actually become more prevalent and easier to be found, okay? So let's say, 20 or 30 years ago, there was already common law marriage, but like for a judge to say that a couple in Brazil was in a common law marriage, it would be expected that this couple was necessarily living together and being together for many years, right? To have something like a joint bank account and enough elements for a judge to say, you know what, there is no formal marriage here, but everything that I see, it looks pretty much like a marriage, and therefore I'm going to find a common law marriage in this relationship, right? So there was even like 20, 30 years ago. Now, over time, these requirements, they were becoming less important, and the explanation is that society is dynamic, and life in society changes. So more and more people would be less concerned about getting formally married, but they would still build their lives together with children, with assets. Working together to form a common life. And because of that, because of this understanding, judges started to drop substantially these existing requirements for finding a common law marriage, right? So I had a consultation yesterday with a client, and he was aware because, this common law marriage is concerning for foreign citizens, of course. And he was saying, well, I heard that nowadays you don't even need to live together for a common law marriage to exist. And then I took my time to explain to him the whole situation, how it is nowadays. But I started with a joke. I said, listen, nowadays, if you go for a cup of dates, you could be found in a common law marriage, right? Of course, this is a joke. It's not as bad as it is, as this joke, of course. But the truth is, there is pretty much no requirement for a judge to find you in a common law marriage. Or let's put in a different way, a judge is going to look at different factors, but there is no single requirement for the judge to find a couple in a common law marriage, right? So a common law marriage could exist even if the couple lives like in separate homes, right? That's one thing. You don't need to be together for a year, right? So there was this kind of benchmark a few years ago. Listen, if these guys or if this couple, if they haven't been together for at least a year, it doesn't make any sense for a judge to find a common law marriage in such a relationship. Okay, but there was a few years ago. So nowadays, even for less than a year, there could be a common law marriage, right? Like it's rare, of course. Like judges, they are gonna feel more inclined to find a common law marriage, the more factors they can find in favor of common law marriage. But what I want to highlight over here is that there is no single must-have factor for common law marriage to be found. Okay, so that's pretty much the state of the law nowadays. And just to give you like an example of how important common law marriage has become, in 2002, it was issued the most recent version of the Brazilian civil code. Okay, Brazil goes by the civil law system, while the United States and the United Kingdom, for instance, they adopt the common law system, right? The common law means that the decisions are going to be based on prior decisions. And the civil law, of course, is pretty simplified, right? Like, I mean, when you study the differences between civil law and common law, the two systems, usually it takes like at least 6 months in a course, specifically just to explain those differences. So I'm super simplifying here, but civil law goes by codes, by laws that the Brazilian legislators are going to enact. And common law is going to be mostly, right? There is also some level of code, of laws in common law, but common law is recognized as a system that's going to build upon prior decisions to issue the future decisions, okay? So in Brazil, because of this approach to code, things need to be usually in a code. And going back to the civil code from 2002, in the civil code of 2002, for instance, for probates, right? When a person dies, there's going to be a succession plan. So this deceased person's assets are going to be distributed. And in 2002, there were like two separate tracks. One track for a partner coming from a formal marriage, and there was a second track for common law marriage partners, right? The so-called união estável in Brazil. And in 2002, there was an understanding that someone who had a formal marriage would have more rights than the person who didn't have a formal marriage, right? Which kind of makes sense. I think still today, it would make sense, at least from my perspective. But recently, a few years ago, there was a decision that this, dual track or this distinction between a formal marriage and a common law marriage was against the Constitution, right? In Brazil, there is something we say like this is against, é contra a dignidade da pessoa humana, or against the dignity of the human person, right? And it's a pretty simplistic concept, but for some reason, the Brazilian legal system loves this concept, and whenever they think something it doesn't sound good from today's society perspective, they are gonna pretty much use this concept and say that that thing is against the Constitution. So that's exactly what happened to the distribution of assets. And nowadays, although the 2002 Civil Code still prescribes different succession rights for a spouse from a regular marriage and a partner from a união estável union, right, or relationship. Nowadays, because of this decision by the Brazilian Supreme Court, both types of relationship are going to be considered pretty much the same. And the message that is coming from this decision is that there is no difference between regular marriage and união estável anymore. Like they're pretty much the very same thing, okay? And I like to say that actually the união estável or the common law marriage in Brazil is going to potentially give a spouse even more rights, believe it or not, because of the following. If you're going to get into a formal marriage, you're going to have a shot at getting a prenuptial agreement, right? The prenuptial agreement is not going to give you, superpowers to say that, to dictate every way in which the assets are going to be acquired by the parties, but it does help you protect income coming from prior assets, from assets that you had prior to the marriage, okay? So when you have a formal marriage, you can protect yourself at least from this specific perspective. Now, guess what? If you enter into a common law marriage, right, like you just start a relationship with a woman or a man in Brazil, and 10 years down the road, like you guys are going to separate, you're going to part ways, you never had the prenuptial agreement done in the first place. And therefore, at least from this scenario, the spouse would have more rights in the common law marriage or união estável than this spouse would have under a regular marriage with a prenuptial agreement, right? So from this example, you can probably tell how concerning união estável is, particularly for foreign citizens, because foreign citizens, they don't understand the Brazilian culture in general, right? Like usually, and after a few years, you start to get a good grasp. But, unfortunately, a lot of people, they are going to get into a common law marriage without knowing they are getting into a common law marriage, right? I think that's the message over here, is to understand the consequences of your choices in Brazil when it comes to relationships. And based on what we see in our consultations, there are many foreign citizens who have no clue about the consequences of a romantic relationship in Brazil, okay? I hope this makes sense. We have a message here from Stock King. Good morning, Stock King. Feel free to suggest a topic here for us to discuss. We are all ears, and I see we have other viewers. Of course, we have other people attending our live stream. Feel free to participate. When you participate, I make sure we are addressing topics of interest to the expat and foreign citizen community in Brazil, okay? So feel free to shoot your messages. There is no subject that's off topics and your participation is welcome. All right. So let me see another question here. My Brazilian girlfriend and I are separating after 10 years, roughly 10 years of relationship. She says I should pay support. And am I required to do so? Okay. So going back to the common law marriage, the first thing we're gonna tell you is that like a 10-year relationship most probably is gonna be found as a common law marriage in Brazil, meaning the judge is gonna be addressing the possibility of spousal support from a marriage perspective, right? Now, at the same time that common law marriage has been growing as a concept, as an institute in Brazil, there is also this understanding that women and men, they are not that different anymore, at least in this nowadays society, and therefore, if this like soon to be ex-wife, right, your ex-girlfriend, if she's still young, if she can work, if she's healthy, right, if there is nothing precluding her from making a living, guess what? The judge would not be inclined to provide or to order a spousal support. Okay. This said, it's going to depend on the specifics. So let's say if you are a wealthy person, if you are coming from Europe, from the United States, you have, I don't know, a couple of $1 million in assets, and you've been taking your girlfriend to trips abroad in Europe, to the United States, to Asia, to South America, right? This person has been driving a brand new car, and this person did not have this type of life before meeting you. The judge is probably going to have the following thinking. Well, she was enjoying a certain standard of living during this 10-year relationship, and now, because this relationship is coming to an end, of course, she's not going to have the same access that she had before. And therefore, I'm going to probably assign a temporary spousal support. Your girlfriend is going to have, I don't know, like a couple of years or 3 years, maybe to try to get a college degree and find a profession that's going to give her a better shot at earning enough income, if not to have the same standard of living that she had when she was with you, at least a reasonable standard of living. So because of this thinking, the judge would potentially assign a temporary spousal support, right? Common law marriage. You never married, right? No paper signed. Maybe you didn't even live together, but there is this possibility that the judge would still order a spousal support for a couple of years. Okay? I hope it makes sense. All right. We have Dana. Good morning, Dana. Thank you for attending our live stream. My question is about consultation. Is it the same price if I go to your office in the USA, right? So we have a couple of physical offices in the US. We have an office in Dallas, and we have an office in Los Angeles area in El Segundo. However, we do not have consultations at the office because usually the first consultation, I like to do it myself. We have a team, with lawyers, with staff, with admin, and whoever is working with our law firm, they know the people, right? Like we have Patrick, or Patrick, like we say in Portuguese. We have Camila, we have Paulo, we have Victoria, we have Justin, we have a lot of people. However, chances that I'm going to be at the same spot that you are intending to visit, it's not big because I'm usually around. I'm traveling. I attend some of the cases we have in Brazil, and therefore we have as a standard here at the firm that consultations are going to be done by Zoom, and there is a big upside for consultations over Zoom, which is the possibility of sharing resources. Usually during a consultation, we're going to share many resources like websites that you can use to achieve some of the things by yourself. For instance, if we're talking about an immigration journey, I'm going to show you the RNM card, right? I'm going to pull up a screen. You're going to see the RNM card. If you have questions about the Brazilian tax ID, the CPF, if you have questions, about many things. For instance, yesterday we had a consultation about probate in Brazil. So it was easy for me to, just open up the court system and show exactly how the documents for a probate look like. So Zoom is a pretty good tool for this purpose. Like the other person, if they have files in their computer, the person can share these files as well. And that's why we use only Zoom for our consultations. Okay, Donna? I hope that answers the question. We have Ajim Trades. Welcome, Ajim. Thank you for joining us. Ajim has a question. Hi, I want to marry my girlfriend in Brazil and stay there until U.S. marriage visa, probably 18 months, is issued, right? How do I stay in Brazil during that time? Digital nomad. All right, Jim. So you have a couple of options, right? So if you want to stay in Brazil for 18 months, the digital nomad is going to give you a full year. So we're talking about 12 months. And the digital nomad, at least for now, it's renewable for a single term. So you could potentially have 24 months, right? And I like the digital nomad because it's a low commitment, particularly if you are still dating your girlfriend, right? I think that the digital nomad is not going to bring unnecessary pressure for your relationship because you're going to be able to secure this benefit without needing her help, which I believe it's something positive, right? So I do like the digital nomad visa path. Now, if you marrying your girlfriend like in short term, right? Like you're gonna marry a couple of months, the marriage-based residency could be a potential track. Like it gives you a residency right off the bat, so you don't need to renew anything. My concern with the marriage-based residency is that, in theory, you're gonna get permanent residency on the first day when the benefits issued. From a Brazilian perspective, marriage is a pretty it's something important in the Brazilian legal system. So from an immigration perspective, when you get the residency, they usually give you the permanent residency. And based on the Brazil tax code, when you get permanent residency, you are automatically a Brazilian tax resident. Okay, so if you don't intend to live in Brazil for the long run, that may be something that you wanna avoid. And the digital nomad could be helpful on this front. This said, there is a second trigger for Brazilian residency, which is staying in the country for over 184 days, right? Roughly 6 months. So, in other words, a few things for you to consider. And of course, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Do not make important decisions without a more in-depth analysis of your specifics. But again, just the tip of the iceberg. First thing, you get permanent residency. You are automatically a Brazilian tax resident. You cross 184 days in Brazil, you are also a Brazilian tax resident. And Brazil, just like the United States, is going to look at your global income, right? So this is a pretty big deal. So if you want to avoid interactions with, or let's say, substantial interactions with the Brazilian tax system, you could pick the digital nomad visa route. And once you've been for 180 days in Brazil in a year, go back to the U.S., and then come back afterwards, so you don't incur in the 184 days rule in Brazil, which is also going to trigger the Brazilian residency from a tax perspective. All right, Jim, I hope that helps. And marriage is always something serious. So the opportunity of spending some time with your girlfriend in Brazil before pulling the trigger, it's highly recommended. Okay. Of course, we are not like romantic advisors, but we can tell you what we see from our consultation, from our interactions with the expat and foreign citizen community in Brazil, and during our consultations, conversations, and so on. There are wonderful relationships between Brazilians and foreign citizens. I've seen many relationships crossing like 20, 30 years, pretty solid, pretty respectful, right? Like you see that, and you see this thing is super legit. And at the same time, you also see some things that it doesn't look like it's gonna last for long. So you can never tell up front which one is gonna be yours. So if you have an opportunity to try out a closer relationship to see how a life together would be before you get into a marriage, which is something extremely serious, that could be a good idea. All right, Jim, Trades, thank you so much. You're very welcome, Agent. All right, let me see if we have more questions. Should I be concerned about my assets when entering into a relationship in Brazil? Well, I think it's not about Brazil. It's probably about any relationship at all, right? So if you are entering into a relationship in the United States, in the UK, in Spain, in Russia, in anywhere, right? Like you are opening yourself up to claims. That's just how relationships are. And by the way, not just like romantic relationships. It could be work relationships, right? Business relationships. There is always some a level of entanglement when it comes to assets. And in Brazil, this would not be different. So if you are entering into a relationship with a Brazilian and going back to the common law marriage or união estável in Brazil, it doesn't really matter if you are going formal or informal after you being presenting yourselves as a couple to society. There is going to be a presumption that there is a common law marriage. And this presumption is going to bring the expectation that assets acquired during the course of this relationship are going to be common property, okay? I'm using the language used in the United States. If any of these terms do not make sense because you're not from the US or from the UK, let me know and I can explain the term in more details. But common law property, it means it's not like separate property. It means it's a property co-owned by the couple, right? even if the title is on one of the partners, right? So some people, they say, well, but if I buy on my name only, the title says it's my property, so the common property thing is not going to catch me, and that's not how it works, okay? And by the way, not just in Brazil. So for instance, in California, if you have like title for a house and you go into divorce, because title it's on your name, there is an expectation that the house is a separate property, but that's all you got. It's an expectation, right? If during the divorce, it's proved that this property was bought during the course of the marriage, with monies acquired during the course of marriage, guess what? The fact that the property is titled on your name is not going to mean anything. The asset is still going to be considered for the purpose of distribution. So same thing in Brazil. Now, this is kind of common across different legal systems, different countries. One thing that kind of surprises me, and maybe because I am trained like in legal concepts, and this question usually, of course, comes from lay people. They are going to say, well, but this is going to apply only to assets in Brazil, right? And of course, the answer is no. Okay, marriage doesn't have borders. Sometimes you need to record a marriage cross borders to produce the full effects of the marriage. But once you married anywhere, okay, even in Mars, all right, even in the moon, right? So you married, this expectation of common property or the distribution of assets acquired during the course of the marriage, either formally or the common law marriage, which means you don't have a paperwork, but a judge would still find you as a married person. It's cross-border. There are no limits. And from the legal perspective, again, I understand when this question comes from lay people, but from a legal perspective, this question doesn't make any sense, okay? You marry your assets, your global assets, your assets anywhere are going to be on the table, right? And now these are going to be the assets acquired during the course of the relationship, right? It's not going to reach the assets that you had prior the relationship, right? So let's say if you enter into a marriage or a common law marriage in Brazil and you have 10 properties, of course, like the titles for these properties, they are going to be prior to the marriage, and nobody is going to find that these properties should be distributed because, again, they were owned, they were acquired prior to the marriage. Now, the trick part about the existing assets, which is concerning to me because, for instance, usually they don't know about it. The income that you would get from existing assets, it may be considered common property in Brazil, okay? And this is a distinction. In other legal systems, it doesn't work like that. If you have a separate property prior to the marriage, the income arising from these properties is going to remain a separate property, right? Like there is even this concept that the nature of the source asset is going to be the same nature of the income arising from the asset, not in Brazil. In Brazil, in our example, there are 10 properties owned by one of the partners prior to the marriage. The income arising from the existing 10 properties, it's going to be considered common law property unless you get a prenuptial agreement done. And this prenuptial agreement is going to specifically say that the income from prior assets is also going to be separate property, okay? If you don't have this prenuptial agreement done, A judge most probably would say that all the income from existing properties prior to the marriage, it's going to be common property. Okay, so that's pretty important. Usually, when we assist foreign citizens with prenuptial agreements, that's going to be the number one thing addressed. And I hope this answers the question. All right, let me see if we have any other questions here in the YouTube chat. Looks like we did answer all of these questions. Let me take a look at our other list of questions. What is the difference between regular marriage and common law marriage in Brazil? All right, I think we did answer this question, but I'm gonna try to answer in a more succinct and direct way. So there was a distinction in the past in terms of obligations and rights, but a few years ago it was decided by the Brazil Supreme Court that they are pretty much the same thing. Okay, so I would say today there is not much in terms of difference. There is a difference, of course, in terms of how you get into the marriage, right? If you're gonna go by the formal route, of course, you have many steps that you need to complete in order to be formally married in Brazil. And the common law marriage, most people know and understand. And again, in Brazil, it's called união estável, which would roughly translate as a stable union. But the correct international term is common law marriage. And the common law marriage, of course, you don't need anything to enter into a common law marriage. If a judge finds that there are enough elements and facts to support the existence of a common law marriage, right? There is something that trips foreign citizens a bit because in Brazil we have a kind of registration of common law marriages, again, união estável in Portuguese. And so once a foreign citizen he hears like, all right, so if there is a registration for common law marriage and I'm not registering, then that means I'm not in a common law marriage, right? So you could be in a common law marriage by either recording your common law marriage in a cartório, in a registry, and as soon as you do so, of course, you are in a common law marriage. But even if you don't do anything, right? Even if you don't do anything, if one of the partners files for a união estável in a court, right? They're usually gonna do that at the end of the relationship, right? Like during the relationship, nobody is gonna fight against the other party in a court of law. So this is done after a breakup. After a breakup, one of the partners goes to a court of law and is gonna present the facts. So the judge is gonna review the facts and it's going to adjudicate. It's going to adjudicate a common law marriage, right? So in this case, you didn't register anything. It was found by a judge, okay? And there is not much you can do about it. You can appeal, of course, like to a higher court. After you appeal to a higher court, you can go to the second highest Brazilian court, which is the STJ. And after the STJ, in theory, you could still appeal to the Supreme Court, but good luck reverting the initial decision, right? So I hope this answers the question. Let me see here our YouTube chat. Okay, no new questions. We are up to date. Let's take another question from our offline collection of questions. My Brazilian girlfriend is pregnant. Okay, a lot of people here with concerns related to relationships, right? What about now? Okay, like I would assume based on this question that the Brazilian girlfriend is pregnant. I would assume it's a foreign citizen man, right, who's asking this question, and that he doesn't plan to marry the girlfriend, right? Otherwise, he wouldn't be asking, "What about now?" Okay, so the "What about now?" It conveys to me that this person thinks like he's in a bad spot. Of course, this is going to be a personal interpretation, right? We don't know about the underlying relationship, but let's try to answer the "What about now?" with not much information about the relationship, right? So here, the main thing is not going to be like the potential common law marriage, although, of course, like if you have a child with someone else and you're still in a relationship, I think it is pretty much settles the question. You are in a common law marriage, right? You've been in a relationship, you have a child. I think by today's standards, Brazilian judges, they are not going to think twice before finding you in a common law marriage. Okay, now there is I think that the primary aspect of the question here is the child, of course, and as soon as you have a child in Brazil, you're going to be co-responsible for support. And how much you're going to need to pay in support is gonna be decided by a set of factors. Some of them are going to be, right? There are several factors. I can probably tell you most of the main ones. The main one, it's going to be your income. Okay, so someone who has a 20,000 US dollars in yearly income is not going to pay the same child support than someone making 200,000 US dollars a year, right? I think it makes sense. That's the first thing. The second thing is like the other parent. Is the other parent capable of helping with the financials? So that's another important factor. Even if you're making 200,000 US dollars, if your partner is also making 200 US dollars, so you are in the same kind of level, okay? This is going to be considered into the child support that you're going to end up paying. Something else that's going to be considered is the need of this child. So if you have, for instance, a healthy child that's going to public school, and the public school system, it does fit in the social environment that the couple was in, right? During the relationship, judge will say, yeah, the child can still go to a public school. So, the need for support is also going to be an important factor. To try to expand a little bit in terms of what this type of need means, now let's think about a child who has special needs. Okay, so this child is not going to go maybe to a public school. This child is going to go to a special education school where it's extremely expensive. Maybe there's going to be like some treatments that the child is going to need. Let's say the mother or the girlfriend is not going to be able to work because she needs to take care of this child like 24/7. So of course, this is going to be dramatically different from a situation in which the child is healthy and can basically just go to public school, right? So that would be the third factor we are mentioning here, right? Another important factor is going to be if the support payee. So in our example here, it would be the father. If the father has other children, right? This is also taken into consideration by the Brazilian legal system. So if you have many children, right, you're going to pay less child support. If you have a single child, you should be able to pay more child support. And there is no exact calculation. A judge is going to take that into consideration, right, when ordering the child support. This said the child support is pretty much guaranteed that you're going to pay unless you are the one taking care of the child, right? Like if you're taking care of the child, for instance, in our example, is a special needs child, and you are the one taking care, like you're the father, and you're taking care of the child, the mother would be the one in charge of paying support, right? Makes sense. All right. Any other topics from our YouTube audience? No questions. All right. Another question, and all of these questions they been about relationships. That's we try to have a consistent theme here. But again, if you have another question, feel free to ask, and we can address the topic here. So it doesn't need to be about relationships only. All right, another question here. Can my former Brazilian partner reach my assets here in Europe, right? Former Brazilian partner. So we can tell that there was a breakup. Now maybe the foreign citizen went back to Europe. There is still the Brazilian former partner in Brazil. And this person's question is, can the Brazilian reach out to the assets in Europe, right? That's a complex question. That's a complex question. And the reason for that is there is a gap between what the law is going to allow a Brazilian to do and what the Brazilian is going to be able to do. Okay, because in theory, again, when you have a marriage in Brazil, either a formal marriage or a common law marriage, like there are no borders. The marriage is cross border. You married everywhere, right? You married in Brazil, you married in Europe, you married in Mars, you married in another galaxy. Even if there is a need for a recording abroad, and that's super common, like you marry in one country and another country say, listen, but you need to record the marriage here. If you didn't record, it doesn't mean the marriage is not valid. It just means that there wasn't a formality taken care. You still married everywhere. So in this example, the Brazilian can reach, yes, the Brazilian can reach the Europeans' assets in Europe. So, trying to make it very simple to understand, if there is a decision in Brazil that, let's say there was a 10-year common law marriage between two partners in Brazil, and then the foreign citizen comes back to Europe, there is a decision by a judge that first there was a common law marriage, meaning there was a marriage, right? It just wasn't recorded or formally, recorded. And the assets acquired by the parties during this 10-year period should be shared, right? Which kind of, I hope it makes sense. And this decision would potentially give the Brazilian party access to half of the assets the European party would have obtained or acquired during the course of the marriage, okay? Of course, not for access to the property prior to the marriage, but during this 10-year period, let's say the European bought 3 apartments. So in theory, from a very simplistic analysis, and again, this is just the tip of the iceberg, whatever answers we give over here, they are simplified, right? And nobody should take action upon them. This is for you to have an initial understanding of the subject, not for you to make important decisions, of course. I hope people understand that. But going back to our example, so in theory, yes, the Brazilian would have access to your assets in Europe. That's from a strictly legal perspective. Now, for a Brazilian to reach out or to reach your assets in Europe, there would be a need for a coordination between the Brazilian lawyer in Brazil and a licensed lawyer in Europe, in the country where you have the assets, to make this, reaching your properties feasible, right? Because the Brazilian attorney, he doesn't know how the legal system works in Europe. So he will need to coordinate with another lawyer in your native country in Europe. Okay, I hope that makes sense. And the challenge for that is that these, like cross-border lawyers, they are usually more expensive because they are not experienced only in Brazil, but they understand how this connection of legal systems work. That's a skill that's not very common, and there is a premium price for this type of knowledge. Therefore, for the Brazilian party to reach your assets in Europe, there is going to be a need for a lot of legal fees, and in our experience, this could represent a barrier. This would represent a barrier for many Brazilian parties who end up not being able to pursue the assets of their European partner, and because of this challenge or difficulty, I think this kind of perpetuates this misconception that, like whenever you have a relationship in Brazil, it's just about the assets in Brazil. There is no consequence to assets elsewhere. But if there is this misconception, this is because it is difficult for Brazilian parties and Brazilian attorneys to reach out, assets abroad. Now, to conclude this answer, right, this is also going to depend on how much assets are on the table. If we're talking about a single apartment in Portugal that's going to be worth 50,000 euros, right, maybe the Brazilian party is not going to be able to mobilize lawyers to go after this single property. Now, let's think about someone who's a billionaire in the United Kingdom, right? And then there was this common law marriage for 10 years, and it's easy to imagine that the billionaire partner from the UK has acquired, I don't know, let's guess 100 million. I'm just, throwing numbers there to illustrate the concept, right? Don't mind the crazy numbers. So if the UK citizen acquired 100 million pounds in assets over the course of 10 years, I guarantee Brazilian attorneys, they are going to organize themselves to go after the assets in the UK, because then it's a huge pie. This huge pie, it's going to allow the compensation of a legal team and all the effort that's going to be necessary for the Brazilian partner to chase the European partner's assets in the UK, right? I hope that makes sense. All right, let's go back to our YouTube chat. All right, Imoran Joe. Since all documents require a sworn translator, what happens if I am from a country that uses a language that doesn't have a sworn translator in Brazil? How would a translation be possible? All right, that's I would assume this is a theoretical question, not a practical one. Nowadays there are thousands and thousands of sworn translators in Brazil. And Joe, you probably know, because of your question, that although there are thousands, there are not hundreds of thousands. So yes, there is the potential for a specific language to not have a matching sworn translator in Brazil. And what's going to happen is, like, you're going to need to take an exception route, okay? So if you are dealing with a legal process in Brazil, it could be, for instance, immigration, okay? It could be the purchase of real estate property. It could be a probate, right? It could be any type of legal process that's going to require the so-called sworn translation. The truth is, you're going to need to take an exception path because the cartório, usually cartórios in Brazil, the registries, they don't want to handle with exceptions. So you may need an attorney to file. It's not a lawsuit per se, but is a request to a court of law to authorize the use of a regular translator, right? So the first thing you will need to show that you have a need. It's a legitimate need. So, for instance, you need to buy a property. You can have your documents sworn translated into Portuguese because there are no available sworn translators for the source language. That's the first thing you're going to need to show. And so the first thing is that you have a legitimate reason. The second thing, there are no available translators, okay? And then you need to ask the court to authorize or to order the registry to work with a regular simple translator, right? Actually, at least for two states that I'm pretty familiar with the regulations, like São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, both states, they offer a way out to the registry. If the registry, understands that there are no sworn translators available, the court system of the São Paulo state, as well as the court system for Rio de Janeiro, they are going to allow the main officer in the cartório to accept a document without sworn translation, right? So the registries, the good thing about registries is that you have access, usually when there is such an exception, this thing is going to be brought to the principal. And the principal, from a common sense perspective, more probably than not, the principal is going to allow for a simple translation to be provided, okay? However, when it's like immigration, that becomes a little bit more problematic because in Brazilian immigration, usually the analysts, they are not really sophisticated, and they tend to handle the procedures on a mass scale approach, right? They just keep these things moving, and there is a checkbox asking for a sworn translation. If you're not providing the sworn translation, guess what? They are going to keep denying your benefit. And if that's the case, in theory, you could file an appeal. You could file a lawsuit. Okay, in this case, it could be a request. It could be a lawsuit. But that would be a pain in the neck, right? The Brazilian legal system, when you're filing lawsuits, a lawsuit can easily take many, many years, right? As we speak, here at the firm, we have a couple of cases that are taking almost a year just for the citation to be served, okay? Unfortunately, lawsuits in Brazil, they last long. Attorneys, they are not going to work on a contingency basis, so you're going to need to keep feeding your attorney, and that's concerning, right? Because imagine like you paying monies and you don't know when this is going to stop, if you're going to be successful or not. So pretty concerning, okay? But I hope this helps with your understanding, Joe. All right, Dana, what documents are needed for a gold visa, right? Well, there is a bunch of pro forma documents, just busy paperwork, a lot of busy paperwork, but I think you want me to address like the ones that could give you most of the trouble, and that's what I'm going to try to do. As usual, heads up, this is just the tip of the iceberg. You shouldn't rely on a short answer, to make decisions. But the main ones are going to be the contract, right? Like when you're buying real estate, like the gold visa, for those who don't know, is usually the real estate residency by purchase of real estate in Brazil. That's known as the Brazil Golden Visa. Another nickname for this visa is the Viper visa. All right, so Gold visa, Viper visa, Golden visa. These are different names for the same type of thing. Okay, you're basically getting residency in Brazil through the acquisition of real estate. So going back, Donna, to the short answer, a contract, right? You're going to buy the property. You need a contract because a contract is going to explain, how the property is being bought. It's going to explain like the price for the property. It's going to explain who's responsible for which payments, like taxes, transfer fees, and so on. So the contract is pretty important. The second document is going to be the new title. Okay, this means the new registro do imóvel in Portuguese, or just think about a title. You're going to need the new title to be issued on your name, right? So this is one of the requirements for the application. So if you just bought the property, there's not going to be a new title, and therefore you're not going to be able to apply. And so you need to wait roughly after closing. It takes about 30 days for the new title to be issued. Again, in Portuguese, Registro Geral do Imóvel. If there is an exception, if the registry handling the title needs more documents, this could easily become a couple of months, right? And so until you get the new title showing your name in the chain of ownership, you're not going to be able to apply. So that was the second document I just mentioned. The third one, which is one tripping a lot of foreign citizens, is going to be the currency exchange contract. The currency exchange contract is going to be an evidence to the Brazilian government that you sent the monies from abroad, okay? Brazil doesn't want you to be buying properties with money that you have in the country. That doesn't work. That doesn't fly. And if you're using money you have in the country, you're going to have your visa denied, right? So the currency exchange contract is going to make crystal clear for the Brazilian government that you sent money from abroad for the specific purpose of buying real estate in Brazil. That's the third main document, all right? There is a bunch of other documents. They ask, for instance, for some type of financials explaining that you are able to, pay your bills. They're the criminal records. They are also pretty important, but I would assume like almost everybody knows about the criminal records need. But the one tripping most of the applicants is going to be the currency exchange agreement. One of the reasons is that like some Brazilian banks, they are pushing currency exchange services hard. And when they don't like to intermediate a transaction where the foreign citizen is going to pay directly to the seller, because usually it's a pain in the neck to organize this transaction. So they are going to tell, you know what, Dana, you can just send, we're going to open a bank account for you in Brazil, and you just send your money to your own bank account. And after that, you take care of your business, right? The problem is like you're not following the specific regulation. The regulation says money coming from abroad to buy real estate, right? And if you send the money to yourself, the matching currency exchange contract is going to say something different. It's going to say money for either your personal support in Brazil, or it's going to say that this is availability, right? It sounds like a lay term, but it's actually a technical term. Availability means you have money in another country and you basically bring it to Brazil because you can, okay? But so this is going to be mentioned in the currency exchange contract. So when the immigration analyst, he looks at the contract, he's going to see something like money coming from your bank account abroad to your bank account in Brazil, and it's not going to mention money to buy real estate, all right? Here at the firm, like we had the clients coming to us after buying the property, and we usually tell them, listen, this is going to be a long shot, right? And the person spent like $1 million buying a property. Usually they're gonna say, "Listen, I don't care, even if it's a long shot. I want you to apply for the visa." And we did get the visa, even though people messed up with the remittance. But that's an exception, right? I usually tell them, listen, this visa is going to be denied most probably, but there is a 20, 30% chance. And, like we don't know exactly the percentage, but we try to illustrate that this is going to be a long shot because if the application comes denied as it should come, they are not going to be mad at us, right? They did something wrong in the past, and we cannot go back in time and make it then redo this thing correctly, right? But I'm highlighting that the way the Brazilian immigration expects this money to be sent is from your bank account abroad directly to the seller. That's the cleanest way of paying a property if you are applying for the gold visa. All right. I hope this was helpful. Okay. We have a follow-up question from Immortal Joe. Could it be possible to translate my original documents to English and then translate the English document to Portuguese through a sworn translator? I'm from Finland. The way the Brazilian authority is going to want this thing to look like is you have your original document, right? Like your birth certificate. They're going to expect an apostille to be on top, which is like the legalization step you need to take in your country. But once you translate into another language, in my understanding, like they are going to think this, let's say this chain of evidence was tainted. Okay, they are not going to accept, right? There is always some wiggle room. Like sometimes we see the immigration accepting things that they should not accept. And sometimes this works even to the benefit of some clients who come to us after doing things the wrong way. And if they accept, very well, but I would never recommend this path, Immortal Joe. I think you're tainting the chain of evidence, right? They want the original document, they want the apostille, and the translation must be done in Brazil, right? So if you're translating outside of Brazil, this translation has no legal value, and at that point, your document is flawed, right? I hope that makes sense. All right. Amjad Islam. Welcome, Amjad. My name is Amjad. I'm from Pakistan, but I live in Africa. Now I want to sell in Brazil. I have around 20,000 US dollars. What can I do before scammed? Maybe that's the question. So due diligence, right? Amjad. Well, that's a tough question, Amjad. Like what we usually recommend is that you retain licensed attorneys in Brazil to oversee the transaction and avoid deedless properties like the plague. Okay, it's super common in Brazil for people to try to sell you a property on a contract only basis. We never had a single transaction like that at the firm. We have a very interesting video, right? Like if you have the opportunity, take note. Search for Florianopolis in our channel, and you're gonna find. I think we have 8 or 9 videos about Florianopolis, and one of these videos is gonna address the dangers of buying or the risks of buying properties with no deed in Brazil, right? Or a local, if you live in the town like for 20 years, you know everyone, you know lawyers in the area, right? You can take possession and keep possession of this property. Maybe, just maybe, right? Like you may decide to do so, but I would never recommend a property without a deed to a foreign citizen. And unfortunately, there are foreign citizens out there who happily buy those properties. I don't get it. I would assume, right, like people have a different appetites for risk, or maybe just too much money around that they don't worry if they are going to waste some money on a bad purchase. But for our firm, buying properties, buying real estate properties with no deed is a big no. Okay. So, and the other thing is like to retain an attorney with this type of money. I respect the investment and the intentions, Amjad, and I'm sure you can find your way to find your place in the Brazilian society, but it's not that much money, okay? Like 20,000 US dollars in Brazil. You're probably going to be thinking about a property in the northeast of Brazil, like the south, São Paulo, Rio, the south. I mean, that's almost impossible for you to find something worthy buying with this money. But in the Northeast, right, like if you're thinking about states like Bahia, Pernambuco, Ceará, Rio Grande do Norte, Maranhão, all right, then you may have a shot at buying something decent, right? Now, my concern is that you're also going to need to pay the attorneys, right? We wouldn't be able to work with this range of property, but particularly if you're retaining a local attorney, that would be feasible. And again, as long as you retaining a local attorney, a licensed attorney, right? Like you have someone to go after if something goes south. I hope it helps, Amjad. Welcome to our channel, and make sure to participate in our next live. Our next live is going to be on Sunday, December the 24th. That's correct. That's going to be Christmas Eve, and we're going to be here happily discussing topics of your interest as usual, all right? Follow-up question from Donna. By the way, guys, we have exceeded the 1 hour original planet time. I'm going to take a couple of questions, and then we're gonna finish up this live stream. But again, remember, on December the 24th, it's gonna be a Sunday, right? And I'm gonna be here for you. So you're not gonna be working. You're gonna be able to have the topics of interest discussed here live. Don't forget, put in your schedule. It's gonna be Sunday, December the 24th. It's going to be Christmas Eve. Okay, we're going to be here. And the time we're going to meet is going to be 3:30 Rio de Janeiro time, which is the same time for the entire coast of Brazil. So São Paulo, Florianópolis, Rio de Janeiro, Fortaleza, whatever cities you think in the coastal part of Brazil, they are going to be in the same time zone, 3:30, or like military time, like it's used both in Europe and in Brazil. We're talking about 15:30. All right. So we have our meeting on Sunday. Going back to the final couple of questions, Dana, your office doesn't do sworn translation of documents. So, Dana, we don't do the sworn translations only. We actually do a ton of sworn translations. Every single day we translate a lot of documents, right? We do the sworn translations. It's done by a partner translator. We are not sworn translators. We are lawyers. So we have a sworn translator who's a partner of the office, and he works mostly on our documents, right? But as a rule, we don't do sworn translations for other people or for other procedures because there is a liability component. If we start doing sworn translations for other people, people can mix up things and say, well, now I have an attorney, right? Like I'm ordering $100 sworn translation assignment, and all of a sudden I have retained a lawyer, right? I understand it sounds silly, but unfortunately, there are some people who get easily confused. So to avoid this liability, we don't handle sworn translation for, people showing up with documents. But every single thing done at the firm, yes, we're going to do the sworn translations, and we have for pretty much every language, going back to the question from Immortan Joe. I don't recall a transaction in Finnish, but I would bet if we have a transaction in Finnish, we're going to be able to get it done. Okay, Immortan Joe. And Donna, if we are addressing, if we are handling, for instance, the property acquisition, if we are handling a probate, if we are handling an immigration procedure, yes, we take care of the sworn translation, right? We don't do ourselves. We send it to our partner translator, and he does exactly how it should be done for you to get what you need. All right, final question from Donna. Can title be in the name of the trust? So, Donna, there are two parts to this answer. The first one, trusts are not recognized in Brazil. Whenever you have a trust coming to Brazil, it's going to be basically a voided concept, right? So if a registry officer sees that the thing is a trust, they're going to say, I'm not going to touch, because this thing, from our legal perspective, it does not exist in Brazil, right? So no trusts in Brazil, no operations, no transactions, nothing done with trusts in Brazil. However, what we saw happening more than once is like someone who's going to set up a trust abroad with the same name of the person, right? So if we have, for instance, John Smith is the client, and the client has, for instance, a trust that's called John Smith and no trust word, right? John Smith, I don't know, John Smith 46, and that's the name of the trust, but there is no mention to the word trust. We saw that happening before. The registries in Brazil or immigration, they are going to mix up. They are going to believe that the 46 or whatever word is in there, it was a mistake, and they are going to let this thing go through. Now, at the end of the day, the property is not going to be recorded on the trust name, right? It's going to be recorded on John Smith's name. And why some people would do that is because they want to use money coming from a retirement account in the US, in Australia, New Zealand, the UK. Usually, these countries, they are going to have the option for a self-managed fund. So the person would basically take money out of this retirement account and send it to Brazil to buy a property and do, for instance, like short-term rentals. And because you are using this money for a qualified transaction, this person would not have to pay penalties on this withdrawal, on this early withdrawal of the retirement account. Now, again, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There is a ton of things that should be considered, and this works mostly for IRAs, Roth IRAs, right? But a trust is like, if you have a trust, we usually are not going to touch the transaction just because, from a legal perspective, trusts do not exist in Brazil. Okay, Donna, so thank you all for your participation. I hope this was helpful for your understanding of Brazil and, topics of interest to expats and foreign citizens living in Brazil or planning to live in Brazil or with properties in Brazil, interests in Brazil in general. And again, I hope to see you on Sunday, the 24th, at 3:30 Rio de Janeiro time. We're going to be here for you to discuss topics of your interest. All right, and see you on Sunday. You take care.